Hello class 10 students. We have been learning with the chapter how do organisms reproduce. Let us continue the next portion of our class. Today we will start from the portion of sexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? Basically, sexual reproduction is the type of reproduction in which the development of a new individual takes place by the fusion of two sex cells, the male and the female gametes, right? And these gametes are always haploid. Due to sexual reproduction, the mixing of the genetic materials from different individuals takes place, that is both from the male and the female. This sexual reproduction is essential for maintenance of the characteristics from one generation to the other, and it is also essential for providing the new characteristics of an individual, because when the fusion of the male and the female gametes is taking place, another new generation is formed that will be a mixture of these two generations. And what is syngamy? The union of the gametes is known as syngamy. Generally, the gametes differ from each other in structure, size, behavior, etc. That is why they are known as heterogametes. Hetero means different, that's why the name. The eggs and the sperms are heterogametes. Why? Because they differ in their structure, in their size, in their behavior, etc. Now, what are the characteristics of sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction is always biparental. Why? Because it involves the fusion of two gametes. The parents have the sex organs, that is, the male parent bears the male sex organ and the female parent bears the female sex organs. These sex organs makes sex cells or gametes. And this sexual reproduction takes place by the fusion of the male and the female gametes, and it involves meiosis during the formation of the gametes and mitosis during the development of the zygote. So here we can see that both meiosis, or you can pronounce as meiosis also, meiosis and mitosis both are playing a vital role in the formation of a new zygote. And this sexual reproduction, it is also a source of variation of the offspring. Why? Because it receives, or the offspring receives chromosome from different parents, from two different parents. Okay, so whatever the characteristics exhibited by both the parents will be involved within the new offspring. And it is also important role, it also plays an important role in evolution process. Why? The segregation of the chromosomes takes place and independent assortment of the gametes also takes place. Law of segregation, law of independent assortment, I think you all know, you have learned it. Now, sexual reproduction, first we will know in flowering plants. Sexual reproduction is seen in the flowering plants, that is in the angiosperms. The reproductive part of the angiosperms, where these are located? In the flowers. And in flowers, the androecium, that is the stamen, which is the male reproductive part, it bears anthers, and these anthers produce the pollen grains. And gynoecium or carpel, it bears ovary, and also ovules are present, which is the female reproductive part. Androecium is collective name of stamen, and gynoecium is the collective name of the carpels. The sexual reproduction in plants takes place in different steps. First, what happens? The pollen grains from the anther, it will stick to the stigma or of the carpel. Okay, and this pollen grains from the pollen tube, it has to reach the ovule for the process of fertilization. So what happens? The pollen grains are transferred to the male portion, and from there the pollen tube is formed, and this pollen tube will be extending to the ovules which are present in the ovary for the purpose of fertilization. And the pollen grains, it will fertilize the egg cells or the ovules. and these fertilized cells will grow inside the ovules and they will later on become the seeds. Okay, and the seeds which produce the new offsprings on germination under suitable conditions of availability of water, temperature, air and light, and that will produce another new plant. Now we come to the structure of a flower. What are the main parts of a flower? The main parts of a flower are receptacle, sepals, petals, stamens and carpels. Basically, these are the main parts of a flower. Now, what is receptacle? The tip of the flower stalk on which the other structures rest. That is known as receptacle. If you have a book, you can see the picture, the parts of a flower. And sepals are usually green and leaf-like structures, which is present in the outermost circle of the flower. And all the sepals taken together is known as calyx. Okay, the function of the sepals, what is the function of the sepals? Is to protect all the other flower parts when the flower is in bud stage, when it is very small before blooming. It protects the other parts of the flower. Okay, now what are the petals? Where are the petals situated? You have to write. If you write petals are situated in a flower at the level of class 10, this will not do. So internal to the sepals are the petals, which together form the corolla. Okay, these are very brightly colored, you know. The petals are brightly colored. Why brightly colored? Because they attract the insects or birds to the flower for the purpose of pollination. The sepals and the petals are called the non-essential or accessory parts of a flower. Okay, next we come to the stamen. It is the male reproductive part of a flower. And each stamen has two parts. Basal thin filament on which there are two lobes anther, and each lobe of the anther has one or two pollen sacs which are filled up with the pollen grains, or we can say the pollen. You know how the pollen looks like if you take a flower and if you put your finger. You have hibiscus flower in your home, rose flower now in the winter season, this is very available. So if you, on the anther, if you put your finger, you can feel some yellow colored free powder type of structures. These are the pollen grains. Okay, sometimes the stamens in the flowers, they are free, or sometimes they are united and they form bundles. And the filaments, sometimes all the stamens are fused to form tube-like structures around the gynoecium. Gynoecium is the female sex organ. All the stamens may be similar in length, but in some, stamens are of varied sizes. Okay, now carpel. Carpel is the female reproductive part of a flower. Okay, and it consists basically of three parts: stigma, style and ovary. A flower may have one carpel or more than one carpel. In case the carpels are more, they sometimes remain free or they sometimes remain fused together. Okay, and what is the stigma? The upper part of the carpel is called stigma, right? And the stigma has a very sticky surface. Why sticky surface? So that the pollen grains stick during the process of pollination. And the middle elongated part of the carpel is called the style. It is a tube which connects the stigma to the ovary. And the bottom swollen portion of the carpel is called the ovary, and female gametes are formed within the ovary, right? And the ovules make the, within the ovary, the ovules are situated. And inside the ovary, there are more than one ovules. The female gametes are found inside the ovules, and each ovule will contain only one single female gamete of the plant. The flowers which contain either the stamen or the carpel, but both are not present, are known as unisexual flowers. Why? Because uni means one. Example, the flowers of papaya, the flowers of watermelon plant. These are few examples of unisexual flowers. And the flowers which contain both the stamens and the carpels are known as bisexual flowers. The flowers of hibiscus, the flowers of the mustard, these are few examples of bisexual flowers. Okay, and a new seed will be formed. The new seed of a plant will be formed when the male gamete produce the pollen. The male gametes which are producing the pollen grains, that will be fused up with the female gamete, which is located inside the ovule. Okay, so these will happen in two steps. One is pollination, another is the fertilization. Pollination, you know, the transfer of pollen grains from the male to the female flower. Pollination are basically of two types. One is self-pollination, another is the cross-pollination. Self-pollination, self means autogamy. Self-pollination means autogamy. It is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or genetically similar flowers. Basically, it will occur in bisexual flowers. In this case, both the stamens and the carpels will mature at the same time. So, self-pollination occurs. This is known as homogamy. Like in wheat, rice, pea, these are the plants which exhibit self-pollination. And what are cleistogamous flowers? Cleistogamous flowers are the closed flowers and they do not open even after maturity. So in this case, in the cleistogamous flowers, only self-pollination will occur. Okay, like you can give an example of oxalis, mirabilis jalapa. Such type of pollination is known as cleistogamy. Clear? Now, what are the advantages of self-pollination? You have known about self-pollination. Now it has some advantages and disadvantages both. What are the advantages? First we will discuss. The advantages are there are less chances of failure of pollination. Why? Because these are taking place within the flower, within the same flower or same species flower. Okay, so there is less chance of failure of pollination. Next is the purity of the race is maintained, means it will produce identical flower. The purity of the species or purity of the race is maintained. And here in this case, wastage of pollen grains is very less. Okay, and what are the disadvantages of self-pollination? On continuation of self-pollination, the progeny which will be coming in the latter stages, the next generation plants will be very weak. So this will result in weaker progeny. Okay, and new species and the varieties of the plants are produced. These are the two disadvantages of self-pollination. Understood? So we will know about cross-pollination and the remaining portions in our next class. Thank you.